Hey guys, it's the Melblade 5, and welcome to my response to MangaKamen's Last Surprise, not commentary. So, to give some backstory on this video, since as per usual commentary fashion, the title is a pointless joke that doesn't tell the viewer what the video they're talking about is until after you click on it, back in April, Lore made one of their Lore in a Minute videos on the lore of Persona 5, and I guess MangaKamen found that video to be such a disgrace to the Persona community that they made an entire commentary on it. And seeing where we are now, yeah, I have a lot of issues with this video for reasons that are better explained when appropriate. Now, MangaKamen's video was uploaded in late April, so you're probably wondering why I've waited until July to actually respond to it. Well, there's one simple reason.
Also, I gotta say this right now, there will be spoilers for Persona 5 in this, so if you are interested in playing the game, turn back now.
This video goes into spoiler territory, and when it was uploaded, I didn't even have my copy of Persona 5 yet. So I wanted to wait until I had finished Persona 5 myself before watching this, because I didn't want a repeat of what happened with Pokemon Sun and Moon for me, where I had the entire plot spoiled before I got the game myself. Granted, I was already planning on responding to this because I had major issues with this video's mere existence, which I know sounds bad, but it will make more sense when I go into more detail about it. Plus, MangaKamen doesn't even state how far you need to be in the game, as in giving a specific in-game date, before you're safe to watch the video, which is why I made sure I had specifically finished it. Although, from the perspective of me coming across this video for the first time, the fact that he brings up spoilers against a video which is literally just explaining the backstory and setup of the game raises a big red flag for me. And since this video goes into spoiler territory, that means I will have to do the same. And just saying this right now, I will have to briefly mention a bit of an endgame spoiler to back up one of my counter-arguments in this video. So I highly recommend that you finish Persona 5 before watching the rest of this video. But I find it ironic that MangaKamen gives a spoiler warning in this video when the background in of itself is a spoiler because, without going into specifics, that's the arena of a certain boss fight. And while I have had a falling out with MangaKamen over a bunch of crap which I don't want to go into because it would take frickin' hours to explain, that isn't the reason why I'm making this video. I'm making this video for the exact same reasons why I make my other response videos, being that there are a lot of things that I seriously disagree with, and I just want to express that. Alright then, so skipping the completely pointless copy of the Dissin' Your Fly Girl Persona 5 meme since that adds nothing to the video.
Well, I was never expecting to actually do a video on this topic. Persona 5! And a commentary to boot! Now, this will be a short video, mainly due to the fact that, well, the video I'm covering is about a minute or so long.
Then what's the point in doing a commentary on it? This is what I meant when I said this video's mere existence bothered me. Lore videos are incredibly short, with their main series of Lore in a Minute, as the title says, being only a minute long. So I find that making an entire commentary hate on such a short video to be incredibly pointless. I'm not saying that the video can't be criticized because it's a minute long, but I feel that making a video on it is unnecessary, and you could have just left a comment on the video, as not only would it likely be pretty short considering what your counter-arguments in this video are, but it would also take much less time to actually do. Plus, one of the many reasons why I dislike the commentary community is that a lot of the things they do come off as being desperate for attention. And this is an example of that because, not gonna lie, when I first saw this, I immediately said, how desperate can you get? And I know that's a very mean thing to say, but still, it gives me the impression that you really needed to find something to complain about.
Someone's desperate for approval.
Personally, I would just ignore videos like this unless I was doing it within a collection of other videos as part of a series, like with 1 Minute Melee and DBX, because individually, they aren't something that actively bother me or that I strongly disagree with.
Meet Lore, a channel that does minute-long videos on cartoons, video games, and other things from what I realized, and basically gives like a summarized version of the lore of the games or whatever they're covering. In addition, they get other people to voice the videos. So I guess this is more appropriate to be covering two channels at once, since this one was voiced by Octopimp, who appears to be an anime channel? I don't know.
Okay, when I say this, I am asking a legitimate question here. Do you know how lore videos actually work? Because all Octopimp did was voice in the video, yet he's getting equal blame for it. When making a Lore in a Minute video, the lore team writes out a script summarizing the lore of the specific installment or series that they are covering, and then they get another YouTuber, or in some cases a voice actor, who typically has something related to the topic. For example, when they did the lore video on Mega Man X, they got Egoraptor to do the voiceover. But in most cases, they end up either using Octopimp or Dodger. It's very similar to Digino Gaming, where all the facts in their videos have already been posted on the website, but they collect a bunch of them related to a specific topic, and generally get a YouTuber who has some sort of relation to that topic. Whoever does the voiceover has no impact on the script or information that is presented in the video. Therefore, Octopimp is in no way responsible for the errors present in Lore's video. Additionally, since you decided to specifically mention Octopimp's channel, in which you question if he's an anime channel or not, if you were to scroll through his videos, you'll see that none of them are in any way related to the Persona series, which means that it's entirely possible that he doesn't play or even know much about Persona. So as such, he would have been unable to notice the mistakes in Lore's script and speak up about it. You could argue that they should have gotten someone who knows stuff about the game to do the voice, so that they could point out errors, but you don't. So I'm still going to fault you for that. So let me tell everyone the real story behind Lore's video. Lore wrote a script of the summarized plot setup of Persona 5 with some mistakes in there, and then they got Octopimp to do the voiceover because he's voiced in a lot of other Lore videos in the past, and because getting an anime channel to talk about Persona isn't too far of a stretch, seeing as how the series has a very anime style, with all the main characters being high school students, and a talking cat, but mostly high school students, and because Octopimp knows little or nothing about the game, he was unaware of the mistakes when reading out the script for the video. By crediting Octopimp in the title of this commentary, you have completely manipulated this scenario to make it appear like Octopimp is responsible for the problems with the video, when he isn't. He only did the voice. And it's not even like you try to prove that he had some involvement in the video outside of voice work. You're just all like, well, since they get billed a voice, I guess it's more appropriate for this to be a commentary on 2 channels! Plus, I find this whole blaming Octopimp thing to be super hypocritical, because Doodle Tones made a response to some sort of live stream you did with some other people, which I'm not trying to butt in on because it's none of my business. But you left a comment where, to paraphrase here, since I honestly believe that MangaKamen doesn't know what the fuck paraphrasing is, you said that you weren't to blame because you only hosted the stream. Couldn't you say the exact same thing about Octopimp, in which he only did the voice, and thus isn't responsible for the problems present within the video? Irony! There's another reason why I find blaming Octopimp to be so hypocritical, but I'll explain that later when it's more appropriate. Now those 2 points were what already made me want to respond to this. But then we get to the points on Lore's video itself.
Parallel to our reality, there exists a realm known as the Palace.
Less than 10 seconds. I'd say that'd be a record, but on this channel, that's So essentially, this calls into question a few things, since no, the other reality isn't called the Palace, it's called the Metaverse. While yes, the players do go to palaces, they're manifestations of the Metaverse created by strong desires by people. Now, while to those who haven't played Persona 5, this may sound like a nitpick, but considering that the Metaverse is the driving factor of the plot, and pretty much hammered into the player as you go through the game, this comes off as a really bad sign.
While yes, the other world in Persona 5 is called the Metaverse and not the Palace, in the grand scheme of things, this is just a small and understandable name slip-up, because palaces are not only manifestations within the Metaverse, but they're also the only areas within the Metaverse that you actually explore during gameplay. Yes, even Mementos, because Morgana stresses that Mementos is just the palace of the general public of Tokyo. So outright saying that the other world is called a palace isn't such a massive error, because it isn't that far off from the truth. I'm not excusing them for making the mistake, but I can understand how they ended up doing that. Meaning that this further plays towards how I find this commentary to be so unnecessary, seeing as how this mistake isn't anything major. And yes, I know there is other stuff in this video that MangaKamen complains about, but we'll get to those later. Furthermore, I strongly disagree with the point on the Metaverse being hammered into the player. Because while it is the driving factor of the plot, The name of the metaverse is so rarely said when compared to the sheer number of times everybody says palace within the game, which further adds to why I can understand this mistake occurring. Hell, I didn't find out that the other world was called the metaverse until around the point where you explore mementos for the first time, which, at least for me, was around 10 hours into the game. And even then, sometimes when the characters are referring to the metaverse, they call it names such as that other world or the cognitive world, rather than the metaverse, which again makes Lore's mistake of calling the metaverse the palace understandable. The only time they frequently call it the metaverse and very rarely mention palaces is near the end of the game.
So I'm left with a few thoughts in my head. 1, that no one bothered to look this over to make sure, hey, we should probably get our facts straight. 2, that this video was made by people who not only know the bare bones of the game and didn't bother to look up the basic fact of said game. Or 3, that these people are only trying to capitalize on the game's popularity and threw this together as quick as they could.
Oh great! It's the whole, let's just assume that people do things for the worst reasons with absolutely no proof whatsoever to make them look as bad as possible, which the commentary community loves doing. Or as it's more commonly referred to as, character assassination. I'm sorry for getting so angry about this, but I absolutely cannot stand it when people do this shit, since all they do is take a good-natured person and attempt to damage their nice image for no good reason. In this case, MangaKamen makes it look like Lore only cares about money and views by accusing them of rushing out the video to capitalize on Persona 5's popularity. And while he brings up other potential reasons, which is more than what most people do, that's still the one he places the greatest emphasis on, which gives the impression that he's saying that one is the most likely possibility. If you just said that you felt they rushed it, then I would have no issue with that, because I can understand how you could come to that conclusion. But for no reason, you decide to add on to capitalize on the game's popularity. In which, do you have any proof that that's why they did it? No! And if you were to look up other lore videos on then newly released and upcoming games, then you'll find that they are much more accurate, meaning that the mistakes in the Persona 5 video are far more likely to just be legitimate mistakes that any person can make, rather than being a result of rushing it out to capitalize on the game's popularity. Plus, with the whole capitalizing on Persona 5's popularity, if I really wanted to, I could say the exact same thing about this commentary, seeing as how unnecessary it is to me, and because of how excited you were to find an excuse to talk about Persona 5.
And to cover my tale, if this was a joke, well, it certainly didn't come off like that, especially since it was the first point in the entire video and there was no punchline. You can say that I cut them off, but having watched this entire video, the comedy here comes from the visuals and the slight vocal joke near the end that could be barely considered a joke at all.
What? How was that in any way a joke? It was clearly a serious statement, and you only spend the section proving how it wasn't a joke, which makes it entirely pointless. I mean, I know that the commentary community will believe that anything is a joke, but that's only in commentaries themselves. On any video that isn't titled as a commentary, they take everything people say way too seriously. Also, what's this vocal joke you're referring to? Is it when they say have fun at the end? That's just the catchphrase they use for all Lore in a Minute videos, which really just means we've told you the backstory, now experience it for yourself. And it's only ever a joke depending on the context in which they use it in, like in the ukulele video. Again, it gives me the idea that you don't know how lore videos work.
Initially, the palace encompassed humanity's hopes and dreams, but soon the ambitions of adult authority figures corrupted both the palace and the real world.
Except, and feel free to say I'm splitting hairs here, how did Futabas Palace do that? Palaces in Persona 5 are cognitions of an individual with strong desires, and it's stated that pretty much anyone who has a desire strong enough can create a palace in the metaverse. Considering that one of the palaces you go to in the game is that of Futabas, a 15-year-old girl, it's not just adults.
No, Lore never said that only adults could have palaces. They said that adults were the cause behind the corruption of the metaverse, and in Futaba's case, that still applies. This is because at this part, you completely fail to look at the reason why Futaba's Palace exists in the first place, which is a pretty big thing to overlook, seeing as how the treasures that the Phantom Thieves steal take the form of whatever caused that individual's desires to become distorted in the first place. Especially in the case of Futaba's Palace, because the story behind it is plastered all over the place. Futabas Palace exists because her mother, Wakaba, committed suicide due to a psychotic breakdown in which a group of men in black suits, who are the ones who caused the psychotic breakdown in the first place, forged a suicide note to pin the blame on Futaba by making it look like Wakaba killed herself because Futaba was being a pain in the ass. As a result, not only did Futaba blame herself for her mother's death, but her relatives also verbally abused her by saying things such as, "You killed her," and calling her a murderer. Because of this, Futaba ends up wishing that she was dead, which manifests into her palace as it takes the form of a pyramid because she views Sojiro's house as her tomb. The reason why Futaba's palace exists is because of the actions of those men in black and her abusive relatives, who are all adults. Even Futaba alludes to this herself when confronting the cognitive version of her mother. Therefore, lore isn't wrong on this point, especially since they also specifically mention adults impacting the real world, as the actions of the men in black and Futaba's relatives occurred within the real world, which had ramifications on the metaverse. Considering how this commentary is supposed to be pointing out plot details that lore skipped over, with MangaKamen effectively stating the truth about the plot, this is also hypocritical because you completely looked over important plot details as well. Again, irony. But there is one other major issue I have with bringing up Futaba's Palace as a counter-argument, being that when Persona 5 was released, Atlus had a very strict stance on people posting spoilers of the game, in which people would face copyright strikes if they did. One of these spoilers was that nobody was allowed to post anything about the game after the 11th of July. And when do you first go to Futaba's Palace? The 25th of July. While later on Atlus softened their stance on this, in which they pushed back the cutoff date to the 19th of November, Lore's video was uploaded the very next day after Persona 5's international release. So even if they did know about Futaba having a palace, they couldn't say it or hint at it, otherwise they could have had their video taken down. And before people tell me that they show the Sandman enemy, which appears in Futaba's Palace in the animation, Sandman has appeared across the entire Persona and Shin Megami Tensei series, so it isn't a spoiler to learn that it returns in 5 as well. Considering there was such a huge deal made about these copyright strikes, I find the fact that you completely ignore them to be a major error. Now, you could argue that lore should have waited until Atlus changed their minds before doing the video, but again, you don't.
Thankfully, people with high spiritual sensitivity can discover the Velvet Room, an otherworldly prison where the warden, Igor, and his assistants, Carolyn and Justine, can teach you to use the personas to fight for your
high spiritual sensitivity. Now, considering that I'm on my third playthrough of Persona 5 at the moment, not once in the game does it state that at all. In fact, Igor himself...
This place...
Whoa! Okay, I don't usually like to have entire sections talking about things like this, but what the hell happened? I swear I did not edit that. That's how it actually plays out in the video. 1 minute MangaKamen is speaking, and then suddenly it's, "This place exists between dream and reality, mind and matter." It comes across as if you couldn't be bothered to check over the video to make sure all the editing came out right, or that you just decided to throw that clip of Igor in there as fast as possible.
This place exists between dream and reality, mind and matter. It is a room that only those who are bound by a contract may enter.
Now, I'm not completely sure because it's been a while since I played the previous installments of the games, and it might be in there.
Then just look it up! In fact, because this video doesn't show what Igor says about the requirements of entering the Velvet Room being in the other games, I decided to look it up myself, and found that there is no mention of a contract in Persona 2, but it is stated in Persona 1, 3, and 4.
Only those who have signed the contract can enter this place.
Generally speaking, only those who have forged a contract are allowed to visit this room.
So that would have actually helped your argument. And Persona 5 is my first Persona game. I haven't played the other ones while you have. So what's your excuse for not looking this up? Because that took me literally 5 minutes to find out. But even then, there is still one crucial thing that I want to point out, which MangaKamen once again overlooks. While the contract that you sign as soon as you start the game is what allows the protagonist to access the Velvet Room, Igor's wording here is very ambiguous, as he says only those who are bound by a contract may enter. The only time he refers to a specific contract is in Persona 3. So as such, it sounds like anybody who is part of a contract, or at least a spiritual contract, can enter the Velvet Room. Initially, this doesn't seem like a big deal, except that every other party member is also bound by a contract. With every party member in which you see them awaken their persona for the first time, their personas specifically mention forming a contract with them.
You seek power, correct? Then let us form a pact.
We can finally forge a contract.
Let us now forge a contract.
Let us proceed with our contract at once. Contract. I am thou. Thou art I.
But none of them can enter or even see the Velvet Room until the end of the game. But that was because of the bonds they forged with the protagonist rather than their individual contracts with their personas. So that means that the protagonist must possess some quality that differs him from the others, which is why only he can normally enter the Velvet Room. And that is where the high spiritual sensitivity comes into play. Because in the Persona series, high spiritual sensitivity refers to the protagonist's abilities to hold numerous personas at once, while all the other party members can only have one. And what is the function of the Velvet Room? To fuse personas together to make stronger ones, sacrifice personas to power up others, and turn personas into items. All things that only a person who can use multiple personas can benefit from. So therefore, again, lore isn't necessarily wrong on this point. They could have explained it better, but you can kind of chalk that up to them needing to fit the summary into a minute.
But what I want to point out is the wording here that bothered me, so I did a little digging and found this. Chalk this up to coincidence and me once again putting on my tinfoil fedora, but if they actually look to the wiki here, then there wouldn't have been an issue with the very first point of the video.
And you just shot yourself in the foot by showing a source that straight up says those with high spiritual sensitivity can enter the Velvet Room, making the previous point completely unnecessary. While this part of the video is more so saying that if they looked up the wiki, then they would know that the other world is called the Metaverse, but you don't know for a fact that that's where they got their information from. I mean, the fact that it's a wiki means that the information had to have originated somewhere else. And I even checked that wiki page myself and found that it's still there, which suggests that the information is correct and doesn't need changing.
You are a new student at Tokyo's Shujin Academy. When a classmate is abused by the school gym teacher...
Now this is the point on presentation rather than the actual lore here. I immediately knew that this was a huge mess up. For one, this scene is actually from a different point in the game. The point in which the protagonist confronted a man who was harassing a woman in the streets. This scene has nothing to do with what's being said here at the time. And I wouldn't make so much of a big deal about this, except one of the first scenes of this entire video had the gym teacher Kamoshida in it. Why put that scene here? Because that has nothing to do with what you're saying. Heck, you could just put Kamoshida right there. We already know you know about it.
Alright, that's it. It's time for a change. This part is the other reason why I find MangaKamen pinning the blame on Octopimp to be super hypocritical. This part of the video, where they're referring to Kamoshida's abuses, but show the scene in which Masayoshi Shido is sexually harassing a woman in the street? The error in this part of the video is solely to do with the animation, which you admit yourself, and even say that there's nothing wrong with what's being said. This also links back to me getting the impression that you don't know how lore videos work, because as well as getting a YouTuber to voice in the videos, they also get an animator to do, well, the animations. In the case of the Persona 5 video, the animations were done by Hagen Tunes, if I'm pronouncing that right. Now, I'm not saying that the animator is to blame either, because I don't know how lore videos are handled from the animation side of things, so it's possible that lore just tells them what to animate, and they do as instructed. But seeing as how MangaKamen's stance on this video is pretty much, if they had anything to do with the video, however minor, they should be credited with being responsible, why is the animator getting a free pass? You place the blame on both lore and Octopimp, but not the animator, when you yourself say that the fault lies in the animation!
You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
But that's not all. There is actually a reason why lore doesn't show Kamoshida at this part. Going back to Atlus's initially strict stance on spoilers about Persona 5, they also went over how people should discuss the game with others without spoiling it, in which they gave a specific good and bad example. In the bad example, which shows how people shouldn't spoil the game for others, it says, players immediately run into trouble with the pervy teacher Spoiler, whose actions go so far as to cause spoiler. While Kamoshida, or more specifically his shadow, appears in the video, they never refer to him by name or even say who he is or what he does. He's just there. So it falls in line with the guidelines set by Atlus, in which you can't call Kamoshida by name or say what exactly he does. As such, even showing Kamoshida when mentioning the school gym teacher would go against what Atlus has stated, which could have seen Lore face a copyright strike. So in order to prevent this, they instead alluded to it in the dialogue, since the events with Kamoshida is what leads to the Phantom Thieves forming in the first place, so it plays a major role in the setup of the plot, as well as showing Shido's scene instead, because it isn't a spoiler, as it's one of the first things you see via flashback after the protagonists begin to recount the events leading to him getting arrested, and because it's another case of sexual harassment, so it's not so far out there. Again, you completely fail to take Atlus's stance on spoilers into consideration when making this commentary, especially seeing as how you go into spoiler territory yourself, and fault them for something they had no control over, which hindered what they could do with the video. And that's everything I really need to say about this video. All that happens afterwards is that MangaKamen's sings Last Surprise really badly before getting drop-kicked by Morgana as part of a super cringy joke. While Lore's video did have faults, I didn't think they were anything that warranted making an entire video complaining about them. You didn't even cover all of the video, only about half of it, which further adds to me wondering what the point in doing this was. Meanwhile, I found far more seriously wrong with this commentary. I mean, it's only 5 minutes long, and I don't know how long this video will end up being right now, but I'm pretty sure it'll be much longer by comparison. The only actual piece of incorrect information in Lore's video that was their fault was them calling the metaverse the Palace, whereas all the other errors weren't actually wrong or came as a result of Atlus's copyright fetish hindering what they could do. This is the video that feels rushed to me rather than Lore's, because not only is it so unnecessary, but also because you completely look over plot details despite slandering Lore for supposedly doing the same thing, you place part of the blame on Octopimp for no good reason, you don't even bother to look up the Velvet Room in the other Persona games, the clip of Igor being so lazily thrown in there, and completely failing to think about Atlus feeling so strongly against people posting spoilers on the internet. So now that I finally got the 2 response videos that I had been waiting months to do out of the way, and have hopefully stolen MangaKamen's distorted desires, I'll see you guys for my next response video.
The winner is Android 18. However, I disagree.